Welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to talk about sound design. We covered some of my sound design techniques in the previous video that was about the arrangement. And this time we are going to talk a bit deeper about sound design techniques. And what we didn't cover yet are the effect sections of the Digitakt, but they are very crucial for my specific sound design. So let's take an example of this track. You hear that there's a lot of stuff going on with the sample itself, but I added a lot of reverb and delay. And if you're familiar with this concept, the Digitakt works with send effect channels. And that means we have to configure the reverb and the delay effects once, and then we can send a specific audio track to this effect channel and tell him how much we want to apply to this track. And we do that by pressing function and reverb. We're gonna get to the reverb settings, and we can modify the following settings. So if you're setting this pre-delay to a high value, the delay starts delayed, or it's getting a pre-delay after the note is being triggered. With this sound, we are not going to hear that, but maybe we hear that with this sound here. I'm gonna add some reverb and a pre-delay that's pretty high, and listen to this. Yeah. Let's make it a little higher. You hear that the reverb starts a little later than the actual trick. That can be helpful if you don't want to overlap the reverb and the original sound, so the original sound stays a little clear. That is why I keep this always to the value of 8. That prevents a little overlapping. Otherwise, it could result in a muddy mix. So I always leave it like this. Then we have the decay time. This is how long your reverb is going to play. You can set this to infinite if you want. That is like a freeze, a reverb freeze time. And what is also important is the input high pass frequency and the low pass frequency. And I always use this like a triangle, more or less like this, because if you set this to a wide setting like this, then you will end up with a very muddy mix, because the reverb will play with a lot of low frequencies that will mask your basses, for instance. Let's have a listen how that sounds like. Oh, did I switch this off? Yeah. You see that the reverb uses now a lot of the frequency spectrum. And if I switch on the kick is now more or less invisible. But if I turn this up and down and sharpen this frequency a little bit, the bass, the kick sound gets now much more present in the mix. So this is something I really encourage you to set in the right way before you start working, because this is one of the reasons why many mixes are they get pretty muddy. You can set this reverb to post compression or pre-compression. I will talk about the compression in a bit. For now, we leave it in the post compression. You can set the volume of the reverb mix by turning this down. Zero. And you can modify the shelving frequency. This is really something you have to try out with your tracks. It depends on what sounds you're using. I usually leave this in the middle of something. So this is a setting of the reverb. This is something I do when I start working on a new track. This is one of the first things I do. The same applies to the delay page. Press function and delay, or press function and filter, and then you come to the delay page. I think you know these settings. I can set the delay time. I can turn on the ping pong effect. This is usually always turned on in my tracks, and I always use this stereo width all the way up. So it really gets something moving. The feedback is always pretty high on my tracks, but be careful with that when you start to modulating when it starts to self-modulating the reverb and the delay sounds, you can end up with a pretty harsh sound. Sometimes it's a little dangerous. And once more, the feedback frequencies are set to a small amount or a sharp shape. So I don't get problems with the other elements in my mix. Let's have a listen. I'm going to mangle this a little so you hear the differences. You hear now that the feedback is playing in the lower frequencies, which could be a problem with your kick or with your bass sound. So I usually let this playing in this area, and you can also add some you can send this effect to the reverb, or you can add a little bit of the reverb channel. That is an advantage while you're performing and you turn on the delay. You also turn on the reverb with only turning one knob, or turning on one effect at once. So these are the effect settings that I usually use. But again, this is really very up to your style of music. You can try to work with very short delay times of 1/64. So yeah, these are the effect settings. And I'm using these on the demo track only on 2 of the tracks. So if you're working with the effects, and they are pretty good on the Digitakt, you should really make sure that you don't overuse them. So I'm usually applying the effects to maximum 2 of the tracks. Otherwise, you will end up with a very muddy mix if you overuse those effects. And on my demo track, track number 1, 2, 3, they are completely dry. Also, this drone plays, I think, yeah, that plays dry. Normally, drone sounds, in my opinion, they don't need effects. I use effects a lot when something plays in the higher frequencies. So I get like an additional layer on top of the original track sound. And that happens on this track. I will show you that. Track number 5 is a bass sound that plays no effects, but it uses this speech or this vocal sample.
We've got another.
And that plays with a huge amount of reverb that fills a little bit, or that adds a lot of atmosphere to the whole track. So this is element number 1 in my track that plays with reverb. Then I have the organ that plays with reverb as well. And and this was not reverbed. I just turned it up for demonstration purpose. Those are the two tracks that use reverbs a lot. And you noticed I have a third track that uses reverbs and delays on this pattern, and that is this drone nature sound. And I added delay and reverb because the bit reduction is modulated with this random waveform, and by adding those effects to this track, I get a very interesting sound that plays in the higher frequency of this, only of this track, and the bit reduction sound benefits from these settings a lot, and you hear that the bit reduction sound gets a lot of delay and overlaps this drone sound. Sure, you cannot hear it because I changed the time, so now you should hear it. I think you can hear that pretty clear. So yeah, this is how I use the effects on my tracks. And I just noted that there is a compression on the Digitakt as well. You can open that page by pressing Function and the Master button here. If you press it twice, you open a mixer where you can adjust the volume of each of the tracks. If you play it once, you come to the compression page. And I will talk about the compression in another topic, in another video. What you can do with this compressor is you can add like sidechaining by adding a sidechain source to this track, and by compressing the whole output signal of the Digitakt. And for instance, you could add like a little gain or a makeup gain with this knob. And I told you that you can add a post or a pre compression setting to the reverb. That means that the reverb is applied after you compressed the sound or before. And that means that if you're using a sidechain effect, let's say I have a kick is on my track number 1. And let's say I have this organ playing, and I set the source to track number 1. That means the sidechaining depends on this kick sound, and I open up the ratio to 20 and set this dry wet mix to 40. You see that the sound starts pumping. Let's do that a little more drastic. And what happens if you set this setting of the reverb to pre-compression, that means it's going to get added before the sound signal goes into the compressor. That means the reverb is getting compressed as well. And let's try that out by adding some reverb to our hook line. You hear it? And if I change it to post compression, you hear that the reverb is added after the sound got compressed. If you want to use this for your sound design, You can do that to add like pumping effects or ducking effects to your track, but just keep in mind that the ducking affects all other tracks. So you can only tell the Digitakt to use one track as a source, and that could be the kick, for instance, and all the other sounds, all the other tracks are getting compressed and getting ducked. So if you want to add ducking to only one of your tracks, for instance, you have a pad playing, like I did right now here, or with the organ sound, that will not be possible because Digitakt compresses the complete sum of the audio signal. So just keep that on your mind. This was a video about the effect section. And let's go ahead with some ARPs and polyrhythms on the Digitakt. See you on the next video.